joining us for another wonderful webinar this evening. Tonight we have, honestly, one of my favorite guests. He's an author of multiple best-selling books, including Battle for the American Mind, Uprooting a Century of Miseducation. He's the co-host of Fox and Friends, a Fox Nation star, and just a flat-out dear friend to the Convention of States movement, none other than Pete Hegseth. Pete, how are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you, brother. Okay, so folks, before we get started, for those of you who are new, I'd like to welcome you to the Convention of States movement. It's a grassroots movement focused on the goal of utilizing Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to call a convention of states in order to propose amendments to the Constitution that would reduce the size and scope of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, and place term limits on all members of Congress and federal officials. In order to hold this convention, we need 34 states to pass the resolution, and to date, we have 20 states, 19 states that have done so. It's complicated. We'll explain if you have questions, but we're super happy to have you tonight, and once again, welcome to the program. Also, our team is going to be in the background answering questions, so if you have any questions, please feel free to type away in the chat. We'll do everything we can to answer as many as we can. However, please do try to keep your questions focused on tonight's conversation. Sometimes we get some questions that go a little out of bounds and we're not able to get to those as quickly. So if you don't mind, please focus on tonight's discussion, and we will have a question and answer session with Pete. So we'll also be taking questions from there as well. And we also have some handouts available for you. So please feel free to go ahead and download the COS frequently asked questions that may help answer some of your questions. We have the conventional disinformation document. We have the COS pocket guide, and we also have pocket constitutions. So please feel free to download those. But the number one question that we get is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, it is being recorded. So if you have to duck out early, we will provide you with a recording after the program has ended. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing that I would like to let everyone know about is usually I tease our January guest. Unfortunately, we have someone penciled in. We just haven't gotten it into ink yet, so we don't have that available for you tonight. However, we do have a link that you can go ahead and register and join us for the first COS at home for the new year, 2024, in January. And we will be dropping that in the chat, so please feel free to register. Okay, now with all that out of the way, Pete, as I mentioned, I'm so glad to have you back, brother. As I've been promoting the webinar, what I've been telling people is that you're an extraordinary friend to Convention of States. But it dawned on me that we have a lot of new people within the movement, and they may be unfamiliar with your COS story. So would you mind sharing with us how you first learned about Convention of States and Article 5?
Sure. First of all, greetings to everyone from the free state of Tennessee, which passed this, I think, back in 2016. So you got some stalwarts, but that's part of what I'll talk about, and part of what I love about this movement. It's a long-term movement. It's, you got to be in for the long haul, shoulder to the plow. And, I've lived in Minnesota, I've lived in New Jersey, two states where there are grassroots folks working to pass it in a far more uphill environment. But we're glad to be here. We sort of voted with our feet, like a lot of Americans, about a year and a half ago, and we're happily hiding out in the woods of Tennessee, clinging to our God and guns. In a way that we should be able to do in a free country. Yeah, let me tell you my story. Some of you have heard this before, so my apologies if you have, but it is worth sharing because like I said, because this is a movement, it brings in a lot of new people in real time as they look around at our political discourse and our system and go, this ain't gonna fix itself. And I'm watching right now, happy impeachment night. Here we go again, and in this case, it's fitting, and I'm glad they're doing it. But it's an impeachment that will lead to a trial in the Senate that will go nowhere because it's controlled by Democrats. But the signal will be sent, and it's still worth doing. But nothing gets solved or addressed for the rest of us out here who cherish the Constitution and love our freedoms and want to pass it on to our posterity. And so, like you, I sit around and I go, okay, what do I do? And before I get to that story, I mean, the first thing you can do is focus on your family and your faith and get that right. Get it right in your own backyard, but the people that you love the most. Jonathan mentioned the book we wrote, Battle for the American Mind. this blows the minds of libs, but we're proud of it. It's the highest selling book on education in the last 20 years, confirmed.
Wow.
It's had sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and it's used at schools and passed around. And where you send your kids to go to school, besides how you disciple your kids and where you go to church, is incredibly important. And then you get to, okay, what do we do at the national level? And I don't even know how many years ago it was, Jonathan, but I would go to event after event after event, grassroots events or diners for Fox and Friends, or just different speeches. And I'd always run into a handful of people at every event who were from Convention of States. And they would come up and say, hello, and have you heard about it? And at first I was, to be charitable, a little dismissive, like, okay, sounds a little out there, but I love out there ideas. We're foolish when we think, oh, we've got it all figured out. It's like, well, I'll hear you out, and then I'll hear you out a little more. And then finally I've met enough of these grassroots people in state after state after state that I said, okay, I'm gonna do a little research on this. Let's see what this is. And then when you look at the brilliance of our founders manifest today in the opportunity we have as citizens to actually form an amending convention, they foresaw the fact that Washington or our leaders would become so corrupt and so obsessed with power that they wanted the people to have a mechanism, constitutional mechanism, by which they could rein in the federal government. I looked at it and then I looked around and said, okay, well, Mark Levin likes it, and all these other guys I respect like it. Okay, this seems interesting. And I had run other grassroots organizations before, a couple of different vets groups, and it's hard. It's difficult to organize people, and I could talk a little bit about that after this as well, but it's difficult to plug people into a mission and keep them engaged. But one of the things that has always been interesting to me is, okay, does an organization know how to get back to people when they reach out, when they say they want to be involved? And so I just went to the COS website and emailed the info account, info@cosproject.org, I think is what it is, and just said, hey, my name's Pete Hegseth. I love what you guys are doing. Would like to be involved if you're interested. And a lot of times those emails are not monitored, or they go to nowhere, or they're dismissed. And immediately it was bam, bam. It was like, who? Are you that guy? Or are you faking it? But it didn't matter. I mean, they reached out right away and said, here's who we are, here's what we do. Talk to Mark Meckler, our president, and he shared his passion, which is everyone on this call's passion. And I was immediately hooked. Once we met in New York a couple of times, and he kind of laid out the vision of what Article 5 and what Convention of States is trying to accomplish. And immediately I said, count me in. And it's been wonderful to be a part of this organization. It's a long-term fight. It just is. And once you realize that, then you can settle into, sometimes it takes people a long time to realize how far we've fallen and how a lot of the traditional mechanisms we hope will save us, like elections or representatives or political parties, and I'm not just talking about the Democrats, that they're going to fall short time and time again and not deliver. And all the while we dither, we lose ground, we lose our freedoms, and the federal government gets bigger. And Convention of States has, as I've said before, I'll say again, what I love about it, it's a solution as big as the problem, which for the most part don't exist out there. Everything feels like you're nipping at the margins and you're playing half measures. And if we're able to get this, when we're able to get this across the finish line, it will have a generational impact. Sure, there's a lot of other things to do. Politics is just one level, but reining in what our government is doing is a huge part of it. So I saw the efficacy of Convention of States from the perspective of a volunteer at the beginning of, does this organization actually work? Do they respond to people that write in? And they did. And I've seen that from others who were involved saying, hey, I know my voice is heard, and I know my chapter's active, and we want to contribute to what's going on. So it was an organic approach, and I've been involved ever since, and I want to help any way I can.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore exactly what you just said there. Like, you are an endorser, but you're more than that because you are really involved in our movement. And for those who don't know, Pete shows up and supports Convention of States. He was at our very first leadership summit in Williamsburg in 2019. He's advocated for us on Fox News. He's been at events in Minnesota and did one with me and our team when I lived in New Jersey. Not many others do that. And you've also been open about the fact that you don't ask for compensation for these kinds of appearances and everything, which is rare amongst public figures. So first, thank you. And second, why did you feel so committed to this kind of movement to do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it is what I said about the organization. It's legit. Part of it is what I said about a solution as big as the problem. But another part of it is someone who's run advocacy organizations before. I had a vets group talking about the war, had a vets group fighting for reform at the Department of Veterans Affairs. What's really hard to do, it's really difficult, is to find a cause or a movement that isn't temporary, that isn't centered around a candidate or a party, that has an action item that saves the country at the top level. So like, this is what we do to save our republic, but it engages people at the local level to say, well, it's not about, electing Donald Trump, or it's not about electing a candidate you're never going to meet, or trying to do something that it's about influencing your state House representative or your state senator, because it is the legislatures that pass this state by state. And, it doesn't require, I think in all states, you'd have to correct me, Jonathan, if you're right, it doesn't include the signature of the governor. It's just the legislature. So interestingly, in some states where you'd say, well, the governor would never do this, the governor doesn't get a say. It's the legislatures that pass this. And so if you're a volunteer, you don't have to find a way to get a hold of your member of Congress or get on Fox News you have to find a way to have a meeting or go to an event with your local state rep, or you run to be a state rep, or you get involved and volunteer on a campaign to take out somebody who's not a supporter, or you make phone calls to your local capital or your local state or House office building. That's super doable. I mean, I think of my own dad retired from being an athletic director and ran for the state house. And didn't win, it's a whole nother story. But like, you can get engaged at the local level in a way that it's far more difficult at the national level. And that creates that connection. It's okay, I'm meeting Representative so-and-so from Forest Lake, Minnesota, or from Sumner County, Tennessee, because if they have the courage to vote for this, which once you explain it to them, they get it. And problem is that iteration has to happen time and time again. There's a lot of education and re-education that has to happen. Then they vote for this. Another state is added to the group that's needed to get to that 34. And it's a very edifying and impactful way to volunteer in a way that most organizations just can't do. You're either fighting for a national cause that has no local outlet or way to affect it locally. This movement has a chance to be nationally. I mean, our kids and grandkids could write about a convention like this, another constitutional convention to very narrowly and specifically amend the Constitution. And you do it by driving 15 minutes to your local state rep's field office, or making a phone call, or having a meeting with them. And then what's great is the organization of Convention of States comes alongside you, because even in that direct advocacy effort, you've got committees, and the committees have stalwarts, and then they have establishment guys, and then they've made a deal with this group over here, or they've been misinformed about what Convention of States really is, what Article 5 really is, and the chairman just won't bring it because then the chairman retires or moves on, and now there's a new chairman, and now you get a new opportunity. So it does take patience, it does take education, but what I find are the people involved with Convention of States are the most educated on the Constitution. They're the most passionate about the Republic. They're the ones that walk up to me in diners and say, hey, I could talk to you about anything I want or get a selfie, but what I want to do is talk to you about Convention of States, and what are you doing about it? And that's powerful. And the other aspect, and I don't want to jump the gun here, but you can often know an effort by its enemies. And every single left-wing organization in America, to include the emperor or empress or whatever you call her herself, Hillary Clinton and others, has called out Convention of States as this really dangerous boogeyman that must be stopped, because they realize it's a constitutional glitch in their never-ending progressive scheme. And if it were to catch fire, and right now, we talk about it on Fox. I talk about it when I can. We get opportunities, but imagine if we got to the 28th, 29th, 30th state, and now you're getting to the point where all eyeballs are on state legislatures of whether they pass this. It's going to become a really big moment. But just like our book, Battle for the American Mind, we've had an opportunity to help accelerate the classical Christian model of education. But it really, none of that happens without the pioneers 40 years ago who started these schools in the wilderness, not knowing if anyone else was going to do it. And that's why we dedicated our book to those people, because they never were going to see necessarily, or wouldn't immediately see, the fruits of their labor. And that might be the case. I don't know when you get to 34. Is it in 2026? Because 2024 is a disaster, and you can expect the unexpected, and who knows what's going to happen. I have no idea. Could it be 2034? No idea. But we will play a part in that, in creating those conditions. And that's
Absolutely.
a big part of why I'm honored to be here.
Well, we really appreciate it. And folks, if you're interested, go on over to conventionofstates.com, click on the Take Action tab, sign up to become a volunteer, and join this movement. Be with me, be with Pete Hegseth. We need you, and we would be grateful for your support. And I do have some questions for you about Battle for the American Mind, and we'll come to those in just a second. But I don't think that I'm breaking any news here by saying that our country is struggling right now, right? And you even mentioned it's impeachment night, and here we go again. And although we may agree with it, is it going to go anywhere? Is anything really going to change? And it feels like there are a lot of great patriotic Americans that are discouraged, that feel defeated, they feel demoralized, and they want to disengage entirely. And even with Convention of States, we've seen our activist numbers go down. So as someone who has served our country and never backs down from a fight, what keeps you motivated to fight on during the darkest times? And what words of encouragement do you have for those who may feel discouraged?
Well, more and more I turn to my faith. I turn to the fact that I know we're in a spiritual battle, but I know how that battle ends. I know who my king is. I know what really matters, what I want to implant on the hearts and souls of my kids, and that I can affect that. I can be intentional about that as a parent, as a father, as a husband. I can make sure they're going to church. I can make sure they're at a school that reinforces that. I can pray with them at home and do devotions and set a schedule of talking to them about Jesus Christ and talking to them about our Creator. It's just, if you're hoping that the national news is going to do it, or one election is going to do it, then it's going to be really dissatisfying really, really fast, even if you're in the national news and a part of those conversations. And so discouragement, I mean, listen, everything about this fallen world can be discouraging. And, we're 248 years into this American experiment, and most experiments in human freedom, well, all of them in history have failed. So we're already playing on house money here. And now we're playing on house money in a way where we're trying to keep a country while teaching kids to hate that country. And we can't change everything about the teachers unions or the Democrat Party or the border. And now we need to organize and protect polling places, and ballot integrity, and the election in 2024 is immensely important. Like, don't get me wrong. But that's one election, and volunteers channel toward that, which are really important. So when I get discouraged, I turn to my family and my community, my church and my school, the things that I know I can pour into, letting more people know about that. And then we have to stop believing. Everyone grows up saying, well, there's a Republican Party and a Democrat Party. The Republican parties are, is the good guys. We know who the Democrats are. We know what deal they've made. Godless, socialist, you name it. But if we're pinning our faith on the RNC or the Republican Party, they've shown us who they are too. I mean, they're just slow. I mean, to be a conservative, you have to conserve something. And if the Republican Party and its status quo keeps going the trajectory they are, we're conserving nothing. I mean, that's why there is such an appeal for Donald Trump, is the disruptive nature of that. And it doesn't matter where you are on him or on the campaign. It's just the Republican Party hasn't delivered either. So what I love about Convention of States is, this is the people. This is not Republicans and Democrats. These are, folks that love the Constitution, love God, love the country, love our republic, love the founding ethos of our nation, and are saying we have a fighting chance. And so when you're discouraged, don't grab at the easy, shiny object, which feels good, and you might get a election win here or there. That's why it doesn't surprise me that volunteers might be down and interest might be down. That happens a lot in election years, and there's so much going on. But I know there's a core base that's moving forward, and I've talked about this with you. I've talked about it with Mark. There will be a moment where everyone just turns around and goes, and I don't know if it's in 24 or 25 or 28 or 29 or whatever, but I don't see anyone fixing our national debt. I don't see any, there's just so many different, I don't see our education system turning around anytime soon. And so look at the long term of what really gets to the heart of things, both in your own life and at the national level. And that's why I think this is a righteous cause.
Amen. And you touched on it there, and that's where I want to kind of go next. I think that the one area, in addition to what we're doing with Convention of States, that feels like we have an opportunity to really be successful is in education, right? So on some of our recent COS at Home webinars, I had Dr. Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation and Dr. Thomas Lindsay of Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we've discussed some of the victories that we have seen on the issue of school choice and education freedom. And recently, we've seen that there's been a public outcry at the disgraceful congressional testimony of the Ivy League presidents on the issue of anti-Semitism just last week. And, many are calling for people to finally abandon colleges and universities entirely. And I know that's something that you've had some strong words about as well, being an Ivy League graduate and everything. But to me, I think it's at the local level that we can have a major impact and achieve success to help turn our country around by getting involved in these school board races, by showing up and taking part in those kinds of things. And I just wanted to ask you, is that something that you agree with? And do you have any further comments on, the testimonies and what we saw and how we, the people, can fight back at that, but also at the local level?
Well, I very much agree. And what I like about Convention of States is it's not only us and nothing else. I mean, you're joining a group of patriots who we know what the core mission is, but my goodness, there's a lot of other things we can do in the process. And yes, we are in a school choice renaissance, and that is a huge part of how you change this dynamic. And that's why the teachers unions hate it so much, and the Democrat Party hates it so much. But once voters get a taste of school choice, they love it. Which is why every time I get a chance to talk to state legislatures, and in fact, Tennessee's in the middle of this right now. The governor just announced that they're going to pursue wider parameters of school choice and education savings accounts. And my message to the reps that I talk to is, don't go halfway. Like you're going to get the criticism either way. They're going to call you evil, anti-public school, whatever. Go for it, because not only will you get the criticism, which you're going to get anyway, but then you'll get the upside of a very popular program that parents will say, wait, so I get the money instead of the state getting the money, and I can choose to homeschool, or I can choose to go to Christian school or classical Christian school or to the public school or whatever, and I'm in control of the money that I pay already for taxes. They love it, especially in parts of the state that are underserved. And that has an electoral benefit too. So it isn't, Convention of States or nothing else. It's Convention of States and a lot of other things that move the needle forward. And so, but I think education's a special case. I think conservatives have missed this issue for a really long time. I think we've ignored it. We've fiddled while Rome burned and thought the yellow school bus was the same yellow school bus we went on, and the schools were the same ones we went to, and all the while as we write about in Battle for the American Mind, they've been entrenching themselves. And now you get to the point where universities like Harvard, where I very proudly mailed my degree back a couple years ago, and proudly like to say that I'm a former graduate of Harvard, and I completely disassociate myself with that evil institution. And I mean it. I mean, it's an evil indoctrination camp that hates America, hates God, and loves Marxism and any critical theory view of the world, which is really just the destruction of Western civilization. You know, we've got to call that out, be honest about it, take them down pegs as far as their elite nature. They're not really elite, they're just expensive. And some employers are waking up to the reality that they're not actually that good as employees either, because they show up with their pronoun demands and their lack of a work ethic and their really high self-esteem. And it doesn't improve the work environment. So it's on a lot of fronts, but a big part of it is, and I'm getting older just like everybody, is looking at all the things that we assumed, that we did hold dear, that we have warm feelings about, whether it's your high school or your college, and you just want to say, well, can't I cheer for the team, or can't I donate? Fine, I don't care. You could cheer for, you know, University of whatever, but it doesn't mean the kids going through there right now are getting a proper education. They're not. They're getting the opposite of what you believe in. And so every time you send a dollar, every time you send another kid, and you hope they survive, you're contributing to the system. So that's, I mean, I don't know what to do with my kid. My oldest is 13. I have no idea what he will choose to do, and I don't quite know what I will recommend to them at this point. But it's not go to Harvard and try to be one of them. Like, that's a definite no. And it's not public school, even in Tennessee. And I know some people can't afford it, and I get it. And that's why vouchers and school choice are so important. But if you can pull your kids out, rip them out. Because even if it's not holding drag queen story hour, all the progressive aspects of education that have infected education are still there. And I could go on and on about that. That's what we wrote our book about. But it's multi-fronts, and education is certainly very important.
Absolutely. And you know what, let's take that, let's go a little bit further. In your book, Battle for the American Mind, as well as your Fox Nation series on the miseducation of America, one of the solutions you identified was a classical education, or more specifically, a classical Christian education. And I believe you send your children to a CCE school. So could you share more about why you believe so strongly in that model? And is there something in that model for those of us that didn't have that type of education can learn from and then apply it to our activism?
I'm learning it right now. I'm learning alongside my kids. I'm reading books that I never read, and learning methodologies I wasn't taught. And there's a reverse generational impact. And part of it for me is, I know not everyone listening here is a Christian, and that's fine. But I'm done apologizing for my faith and what I believe. And our founders weren't afraid to talk about their faith and talk about their connection to God and where our rights come from. They were steeped, even if they weren't believers, and you know, deists, and you had all these different. They were steeped in an understanding of Judeo-Christian biblical values, Western civilization, and how those ideas formed the way we used to govern, to include separation of church and state, and what they didn't want, and the crackdowns they didn't want to see, and the power balance they didn't want to exist in the United States. And that was, it was through that education that helped them understand the human mind, the human heart, the human soul, the human condition, and then try to forge a government that checked for those things. And our kids deserve to encounter those ideas. And if you walk into any public school in America, in some states, they put "In God We Trust" on the wall, and that's great. And we should. It's our national motto, and we should be proud of it. But other than that, nothing in the curriculum is talking about Adam and Eve and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and, you know, Moses. I mean, it's just, there's nothing. And so you're not actually getting the totality of the Western story, let alone the Western canon that came after Christ, that helped us work through who we are and what we believe. And I believe classical Christian education I just look at that curriculum and I say, from literature to history to philosophy to theology to Latin to politics to civics, these individual disciplines are not ones that I ever got. I got the watered down version of social studies, which pretty much everybody on this call got also. And it's an attempt by progressives to get rid of individual disciplines, which pointed toward the glory of God, and instead make man the perfecter, the manipulator of the future perfection of these sciences that could be dissected in a way that doesn't include God. And we don't even realize it, because I was interested in politics, so I kind of like social studies, but I had a sense it wasn't really that. And what was it? I don't really know. Study of cultures, and that's all intentional. And then we leave kind of rudderless. Nothing of what we're taught at home or in church is reinforced. And so I just, part of, I think, the blind spot that I had for many years, and we all still have blind spots, I'm the least perfect person on this call, is that my education didn't merge with what I purported to believe. And so it's easy to be seduced by sort of the worldly formulations of what you should value or of what is good, instead of seeking truth and beauty and goodness and wisdom, all of which are words you will never hear in a public school because they can't believe in them. I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder in a public school. Truth is relevant in a public school. Who's to say you're wise or not wise?
Or your truth and my truth and everybody's truth.
Your truth. I mean, that was the Harvard president was up there talking about her truth. You know, like that's what Harvard believes. So education, and I think classical Christian does it right. But there's classical conversations in homeschooling. There's private Christian schools that do it well, other people that homeschool well. There are classical schools. I'm not saying it's the only way, but dive in alongside what your kids are learning if you can get them in there, and you'll learn a lot yourself.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are tuned in and say, hey, this is Convention of States, why are we talking about education? Well, part of Convention of States is educating folks, right? So many people misunderstand our role in our system of government. And so we really need to be able to educate people not only on Article 5 in the Constitution, but all of our foundation and the core principles that go within our system of government.
You're exactly. Take, for example, the word democracy. Like, it's all we ever hear. All you ever hear is democracy. Democracy is a sham. Like, our founders distrusted democracy. They wrote openly about how democracy was a problem because eventually the majority will vote away the rights of the minority. And there's tyranny at the end. Yet all you hear, especially from Democrats, but from a lot of lazy Republicans too, is democracy, democracy. Well, if democracy is your only lens, then you don't understand what a constitutional republic means and what our Constitution gives us as free people to exercise within that. You don't understand why an electoral college is important. You don't understand why checks and balances are important. You don't understand why they set up a House and a Senate in different ways with different representation. It was all part of checking things. But if you're all for just democracy, which is the only thing they teach in school, that's part of what we have to educate too, is people coming and saying, no, it's not what they taught you. And I know de Tocqueville named his book Democracy in America, and that, I wish it wasn't the title, but that was his view as a European. That's not what we are. And so even things like that take education.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I had a few other questions, but let's go ahead and get into questions from the audience. There are a lot of great ones here. There are also a couple of comments that I just wanted to share with you real quick. Uncle Bob wrote in and said, tell Pete that Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania says hello. And Tony said, Pete, thank you for your service. I always appreciate seeing you on Fox and Friends. So amen to that. Okay, so Amy wrote in, and I think she actually sent this in via email before the show. She said, what practical things can we do to counteract the disinformation being spread by George Soros and his minions?
Well, there's not a whole lot you or I can do about George Soros and their minions other than call them out for what they are and who they are. I think part of my answer is what I've said the entire time, which is affect what you can affect.
Yes.
And then be bold. You know, I have an easy job. I get paid to give my opinion. And my employer knows that sometimes my opinion is going to be popular or not popular. And that comes with the real estate. Your job's a lot harder if you're a nurse or a line worker or, you know, a cop or whatever it is that you do, home care specialist, like you name it. if you're giving your opinion online or elsewhere, like people will come after you, your employers will come after you, and I just think we have to be at a moment where we're willing to be bold. And yeah, sometimes you're going to have to take your, you have to pick your spots. But that's why my job's important to yell as loud as possible to try to create some top cover for everybody to say those things, that because you're not really free if you can't say with your mouth what you're thinking in your mind. And so when you see these things, call them out, and then do your homework on candidates as to what they like. I was a candidate in 2012 for the U.S. Senate in Minnesota. Most people don't know that. I ran in the Republican primary, and the best thing God ever did was make sure I got whooped, because I would have been a terrible U.S. senator because I didn't really understand the deeper dynamics of what's at play, and I probably would have been a good, reliable establishment vote. And so it's making sure you vet candidates to the point where they get it. I think Article 5 is a good litmus test of that. Are they familiar with it? Do they know their Constitution? Do they support it? Because most establishment people are going to go have my first reaction, which is, what is this thing? And until they realize what it really is, and then the light bulbs are going off. The red pill is kicking in. And so do your due diligence and hold people accountable.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And another way to fight back against George Soros: sign up, get involved with Convention of States. He hates us. Article 5. You help us get this done. That's a great way to fight back. Shirley wrote in and said, doesn't the House of Representatives control the purse strings? If so, how is Biden still spending money on forgiving student loans and giving billions to Ukraine?
Great point. Because he doesn't care about the process, and he wishes there wasn't a House Rep. I mean, ultimately, there are so many weird ways that the fourth branch of government, which is the bureaucracy and the deep state, can manipulate numbers in ways that we assume we won't pay attention to, and that the legacy media will apologize for and paper over. They're not holding powerful people accountable anymore. They're putting out press releases for their preferred party. That they are just find every rounding error or reason to manipulate federal statutes and emergency money and continuing resolutions to slide their things through. So you're right, it's extra constitutional. There's no doubt about it. But they think they can get away with it, and right now they have a press that lets them get away with it. And it should be. I mean, look at all the rounds. Who do we just send rounds to? I think it was Ukraine. I'm sure it was Ukraine. It could have been Israel. And if it's Israel, I've obviously have a different view of their fight against Hamas at this point than I do in Ukraine. But
no,
they did it through an approval that should have been part of the House of Representatives, and the Pentagon basically worked with the White House to squeeze through hundreds of thousands of 120 millimeter mortars. So we've lost control of a lot, and that's why Convention of States is important.
Amen. Amen. So John writes in and he said, Brett Baer's new book on George Washington mentions that there's a movement going on in the country to call a constitutional convention. Is there any chance you can let Brett know it's not a constitutional convention, but an Article 5 convention?
Oh, that's interesting. Brett's a great guy. I'll talk to him about it. I think if that's what it says, and I haven't seen that, I think it's a pretty honest mistake in that a lot of people, and Brett's a real fair guy, so he wouldn't be doing it to mischaracterize the movement. I think that's often how it's characterized, to make it seem like, oh, it'll be a runaway convention, or we're going to rewrite the Constitution, when that's not what it is. When you look at it, it's a very narrow set of effectively bylaws by which an amending convention would be formed within the parameters of what's voted on to modify the size, scope, and authority of the federal government. It's not rewrite this, rewrite this, rewrite this. It's not the case. But when you hear constitutional convention, I mean, it can sound like, oh boy, this is going to go sideways. The libs are going to take it over and take that over too. It's not the case. But maybe when I see Brett, I might mention it. But he's a great guy, and I'm sure it was honest.
And I think we get a little triggered when we hear constitutional convention, because the other side always uses that to kind of bludgeon us. So we're a little sensitive when it comes to the labels. Lee wrote in and he said, why aren't veterans and veterans groups getting more involved by defending parents' rights at school board meetings or defending Jewish houses of worship? What can we do to get these organizations more active?
Because I spent a lot of time in the veteran space, because most veterans groups are just happy to be in DC at the feeding trough of more federal dollars. I mean, I hate to say it. I'm not saying that that's most veterans. I'm saying that's most, leaders of the traditional national veterans organizations. They get real comfy in Washington. They get real focused on a narrow set of issues. Namely the VA for the most part, and then VA funding. And then they start to defend that VA funding because it becomes about the VA. And then there's only one party that wants to just permanently ratchet up more spending no matter what. And so then they start moving in that direction, which is the way of all of Washington, D.C. moves. I mean, when we fought for veterans healthcare choice, I mean, I was attacked by every veterans organization. In fact, when I was considered for the VA secretary, I've told this story before, by Donald Trump. He once called me and he goes, Pete, I love you, but why do all the vets organizations hate you? And it was a funny comment, right? He goes, why? And so I sort of explained that it's because there is a really big swamp dynamic of these organizations that don't represent their members at the post level. I'm a member of American Legion Post 225 in Forest Lake, Minnesota, where I was born. I've been a 20-year member there. Those guys would stand behind, defending parents at school board meetings or defending, fighting back against anti-Semitism. But the organizations in Washington are so focused on other issues and could never get a consensus that they won't stand up. But I do think within other types of organizations, vets will be a big part of holding the line for our Constitution. It's just I just don't have we got to start our own organizations, which I was a part of, but hoping the American Legion is going to suddenly find the backbone on this stuff. That's going to take big time new leadership with new priorities.
We are running short on time. We've got a few more questions that I will get to quickly here. I do see a number of people are asking, I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm in Florida, I'm in here. Do you know if there are active states or chapters in my group? Yes, the answer is yes. We are all over the place, all across the country. The best way to get involved, go on over to our website, conventionofstates.com, click on that Take Action tab, sign up, and someone from your state will call you. And even if you're not sure about what you can do or how you can get involved, there's a position called volunteer activist. Click on that. It's an all-encompassing role, and someone from your team will reach out to you and call you and answer any questions that you have. So yes, please go to conventionofstates.com and sign up, and your teams will get involved with you. John says, can Pete provide his views or tactics on how best to counter the enemies or naysayers opposed to COS, perhaps on their turf, like taking the fight to them? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess my thought is what's your plan? Huh? What's worked so far? Oh, you're worried about overreach? Oh, well, look at what's happening right now. And then look at the body of work of the people that support. I mean, point to our friends in this movement who are steeped in the Constitution. I mean, it's just, we can run around, parsing hairs over every single detail, or we can say, overwhelmingly, this is good, true, and constitutional. And overwhelmingly, this is what our nation needs. And first thing we have to do is get it across the finish line. And you're not even willing to try. Why? Because you want to hold another committee meeting about, this. Do you know what I mean? It's just, I think there are a lot of state legislatures doing a great job preserving the fidelity of their state. So I don't want to diminish what state legislatures are doing. I mean, there are states like Tennessee and others that are holding the line and saying, from income taxes to gender insanity to education to illegals to everything, to the Second Amendment, we got your back and we're going to keep fighting. And I appreciate that. There's just no doubt that's good and needed. But I do think the next point is sort of, okay, that's great, that's important, you're doing it. But what about the opportunity to do something generational and something national too with your position? and we'll have your back. So I wouldn't, I mean, I could dive into Jonathan, you'd be better at this than me, but certainly Mark Levin and others, the particular points of what you'll come up against from certain groups that want to sling arrows at Convention of States. You could have that debate. But if you're debating at that level, you've already kind of lost their soul. I mean, this is a buck up moment, and making excuses feels like you're just resigning yourself to playing small ball, as opposed to let's take a shot, because we may not have a chance to take a shot in the more than near future, and so we need you in the fight right now.
Exactly, and to me, honestly, it's more of a waste of our time to try and spend and talk to people that are so entrenched in believing that it's going to be a runaway convention. And I'm talking about like the people that are working for the John Birch Society or working for Eagle Forum or George Soros and all of his organizations. Let's not waste our time. There are so many other people that are more open-minded that just don't know about Convention of States or don't know about the second part of Article 5. They think only Congress can propose amendments to the Constitution. We need to reach out to those people. We need to educate them. We need to get them on board. Now, that's not to say we won't come across people that will challenge us, and we need to be prepared to respond to those. And if you are interested, folks, you can go to cosuniversity.com. We've got an entire archive of courses. They're available to volunteers, so you do have to sign up and become a volunteer, but we do have courses available that can provide you that training on how best to respond to the opposition. So last question for you, Pete. We are a month away from the Iowa caucuses. Would you like to provide us with your analysis of the 2024 presidential election?
Trump's going to win the Iowa caucuses. Trump's going to win in New Hampshire. I mean, you can sort of, there's all this dust and everything, but even all the debates, they were all, JV debates, because the guy who's running away with it is not there, and it was smart of him to do that. I mean, I'll be there following it. It'll be, I guess the interesting aspect will be, what will the margin of victory be? And then is there a second Republican candidate who can attempt to try to consolidate? But the people have spoken if the polls are correct, and if my finger on the pulse of people are correct. I mean, I don't want the deep state or the Justice Department deciding my candidate for me. And I look at the way my life and the state of the world during those 4 years, and they're a lot different than where we are right now. And I'm not going to complain about mean tweets. And I think a lot of people are just stepping up saying, you tell me it's got to be one way, it's definitely going to be the other way. And that's what I love about the instinct of the American people. Like, we don't want to be told what to do, and we know what we believe, and we just want someone to fight for it. So I think it's going to be a huge night for Trump. I think he's going to wrap up and run away with it earlier than anyone in this sort of elite media anticipates. But anything, and then as far as the overall race, expect the unexpected. It's going to be a total zoo, and there's going to be attacks and lies and indictments and impeachments, and we'll cover it all. But hopefully on the other side of it, our country comes out with a new leader who will chart a better course.
Amen. Amen. Pete, thank you so much. Folks, we've been busy answering your questions. I'm sure there were many that we didn't get to. I know we had a great list of questions of people that wrote in. We apologize that we weren't able to get all of those questions answered, but we will do everything we can to respond after this and send you an email with an answer to your question. I do want to answer, though, the number one question that we get in case you missed it earlier on. Is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, it is. So we will be providing you with a recording if you join late or you wanted to catch a little bit more. Another question I know, what's the title of the book? And we've said it, it is Battle for the American Mind, Uprooting a Century of Miseducation. Pete, is this on Audible? Someone was asking that.
Yep.
Is that available on Audible?
Yep.
It's on Audible. There you go.
I will read to you in soothing tones.
Say that again.
I will read to you in soothing tones. Yes.
There you go. So there you go, folks. So thank you all again for taking the time to be with us. Pete, God bless you, brother. We so appreciate everything that you do for us.
Everything you're doing.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone. God bless you, and we'll see you next year. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and God bless.